Paul Hudrick is inside the Sixers. And the Sixers, of course, made that trade on Thursday at the deadline. We'll get some reaction on that. I know he was here on Friday to kind of talk about it, but some new news on the potential of when we might see George Hill. Also, when we might see Joel Embiid. Doc Rivers was speaking just a little while ago. And he joins me now here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline as the Sixers are off till tomorrow night, and they will take on the Denver Nuggets as this trip continues. What's going on, Paul?
Not much, Mike. Just living the dream, man.
Yeah, man. It's been a long trip for these guys. They got tonight. They got, Thursday in Cleveland. And they got, two more on this road trip?
Yeah, Denver tomorrow and then Cleveland on Thursday, as you said. Then they return home Saturday. So, yeah.
So, do we anticipate Joel or George Hill playing in either one of the? Well, definitely not tonight, but they're not going to go out to Cleveland and play out there, correct?
Correct. As it stands right now, so I guess Joel Embiid was the simplest one to explain, so we'll go there first. This always kind of seemed like the plan. You know, they said 2 to 3 weeks. Friday would put him at 3 weeks. So, it kind of never made sense to me that he would ever play on this road trip, given especially being out on the West Coast. It definitely behooved the Sixers more and Embiid more to be here in Philly, getting treatment, being around the team's medical staff. It always made more sense for him to stay here. So, just let it play out. Let him sit the full 3 weeks, and then hopefully he's back Saturday for that homestand, for the beginning of the homestand, so that'll be good. And then as far as Hill goes, a little trickier. For those who don't know, George Hill had a hand procedure. Procedure done to his right shooting hand. I think it was back in January. So he hasn't played basketball since then. He was in a cast. I think he just recently got the cast off. When we talked to Doc Rivers today, clearly he will not be on this road trip. I would not anticipate seeing him for a little bit here. Doc Rivers, it's what Doc Rivers has at his disposal while he's, out in Denver trying to coach his team and while George Hill is back in Philly and getting examined and all that. But he said, he's hoping for at least a 10-game window to acclimate George Hill to get him up and running before the playoffs. He says 10, and I know some people were kind of panicking about that, but I would say two things to that. One, at least 10. So hopefully it's more than that. We'll see what happens. I think Doc was trying to almost be on the more pessimistic side, because if he gets it for more, great. And then the other side of that is George Hill is a veteran. He's 34 years old. He's been around the league. I can't imagine it's going to take him a super long time to acclimate. So, that's kind of where we stand on both those guys. I would hopefully anticipate Joel Embiid coming back when they return home. George Hill going to be a little bit longer.
Yeah, Paul, you tweeted at Paul Hudrick that, essentially that he hasn't played since January, got the cast off, at least 10, meaning that more. So when you get Hill back, you're only going to get about 10 to 15 games, let's say. How do you envision his role and how he fits on this team? Is he running the second unit? Does Shake Milton slide over? How do you kind of see that dynamic?
I think the beauty of George Hill and why Daryl Morey was so eager to acquire him is that he could kind of I don't want to say it doesn't matter, because it does, but for George Hill, he can kind of slide in anywhere. He can do that. He can for sure be the guy who runs that second unit, who maybe takes a little bit of the pressure off of a Shake Milton. He can guard 1 through 2 pretty comfortably, maybe even some threes that are on the smaller side he can guard. So I think defensively, he's certainly going to elevate that second unit. He has the ability to close games. If, let's say, Seth Curry is kind of, maybe not have against the Clippers, quite frankly, Seth Curry just wasn't very good defensively. So on a night where you're facing a team where maybe Seth isn't giving you much offensively and is struggling defensively, you can close a game with George Hill or Danny Green. If Danny Green's shot is off, you can kind of plug George Hill into that role. He can play on or off the ball too. So you can slide him with the starter. So let's say, again, if that in that scenario where it's, George Hill playing with the, 4 starters, that's a situation where he'll be fine. I mean, this is a guy who played with Giannis Antetokounmpo for 2 years. He played with LeBron James before that. He's comfortable doing either one. So I just think that versatility and just kind of his all-around game is why he was so attractive to the Sixers and why I'm not maybe as fearful as maybe some people might be. But the shot rhythm is probably the biggest thing. I just hope he can get, with that right hand, he can have enough games to get into a rhythm where he's ready to go for the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy who's a ball handler, so he can fill that role. He can shoot it 38%. People don't realize he's a good defender. You routinely would see him defending Kawhi Leonard, Paul George. I mean, this is a guy at 6'4", 6'3", 6'4", can guard guys bigger.
Absolutely. And when we talked to Daryl Morey, when the trade first was made, the one thing he talked about was having lineups where you can't pick on anybody. And you can certainly have that, mix and match that any way you want it. Like, just as an example, to close out a game, you could have, George Hill at the 1, Danny Green at the 2, then Ben Tobias and Joel Embiid. That's a pretty formidable defensive 5.
Or Thibault. If you have a lead, you might go Thibault.
For sure. Absolutely. And that's suffocating. If you're talking about on the perimeter against a team like the Brooklyn Nets to have, George Hill, Danny Green, Matisse Thybulle, Ben Simmons, and then Joel Embiid in the paint. I mean, that's a formidable 5 that you're going to have to go up against. So I think, lengthening the depth, lengthening the team, with all due respect to a guy like Furkan Korkmaz, who as much as he has, you have to give him credit for improving on that end of the floor. He's nowhere near the level of a guy like George Hill. To have him as that kind of an upgrade but again, both ends of the floor, I think is huge. And it's, if we're comparing it to kind of that, listen, if you had a chance to get Kyle Lowry, you get Kyle Lowry. But when you look at it from a depth perspective, you still have so much depth, and you've added more with George Hill.
And by the way, nobody got Lowry, so it's not like somebody else got that piece and you were here. Now, we'll get to Brooklyn and Miami and some of the things that happened, Milwaukee. But Joel Embiid, realistically, do you anticipate him being back? Not Saturday against Memphis, right?
It seems possible.
You think? Okay.
At least, I don't want to read too far into it or make any promises to anybody. But the way Doc Rivers said it today, he said, he anticipates not being in their quote unquote normal rotation the next 2 games, and then perhaps being back to the normal one. So it seems like Saturday is possible. And like I said off the top, Mike, the timeline was 2 to 3 weeks. Friday would put him in 3 weeks.
Okay.
So, hopefully he is. I think conditioning is probably the biggest thing I'm worried about, just because he is a bigger guy. He's done a much, much, much better job of taking care of himself this season. But this is still a 7 foot, 200 and whatever, 80-pound big man that's going to have to run up and down the floor for 30 plus minutes a night. So, that's going to be the biggest thing to me, is how much, conditioning, where is he at? But then again, he's got to play in order to get there. So I think Saturday is a possibility. If not, I would anticipate, fairly not too long after that.
Well, see, and I don't know that maybe I'm reading too much in. Like, when they trade Tony Bradley, tells me they felt confident that Joel will be back and ready to play.
Yeah, I think it's one of those deals too where you have to make that deal knowing that, eventually he was coming back.
Well, the last time he had a bone bruise, they said he was coming back and he never came back. But
sure,
different story. I get it.
I think so. I think things are, and I get the pessimism from fans, and I understand, because this hasn't always been a smooth operation as far as the injury goes and as far as the details we get. But I think this year it sure feels different. I feel like we're getting, I kind of trust the organization that they're providing those updates, and I kind of trust, again, like I've mentioned before, Joel Embiid, I think also is listening to his body more. I think he's listening to the medical staff more. I think he's just taking better care of himself. So I think, to an extent, yeah, Mike, like, of course, like if you trade Tony Bradley, you're confident that Joel Embiid isn't going to be out for, I don't know, the next month. But I don't think you can kind of, if that was the hang up to getting George Hill, you have to do it, because Joel Embiid's going to come back at some point. So you still have to make that move because of how much better and the depth that George Hill can provide you down the road when Joel Embiid is healthy.
Well, and if you look behind Joel Embiid right now, you've got Mike Scott essentially playing center, and then Dwight Howard, who's been ejected the last 2 games. After him, I guess you're using Paul Reed. They don't really have I guess they tried to kick the tires on Georgie Dang, but they don't really have a big at all. So I would have to imagine they had to feel pretty secure that they're not going to be playing the next 2 weeks with no bid.
Right. And to kind of untangle some of the stuff you just said, it is kind of interesting that they were in on Dieng, because he is a guy I thought really could have helped them. Clearly, to me, he chose, a place like San Antonio. He wants minutes. He's 31 years old. He's going to be he'll be a free agent after the year. Why not go to a playoff team out west where you're going to get minutes as a backup 5, show off a little bit, and then cash in next season? If he was here, that wouldn't have been the case. It's not like the LaMarcus Aldridge or an Andre Drummond where those guys were clearly just kind of ring chasing. I think Jiang was going for, I want to play, I want to show off. Well, I'm still playing for a good team, and then I want to cash in next year. So, but to me, that says a couple things. One, Daryl Morey's not going to sit on his hands, as we kind of talked about all year. He's going to continue to look at ways to improve this basketball team. Even after they elevated Paul Reed and gave him that standard contract, he is still going to look for ways. If guys become available, he's still going to be interested. He's still going to kick the tires on stuff. And then two, I mean, to just kind of, I know a lot of people have been really itching for Paul Reed, and I get it, because every time the guy plays, just the energy, the what he kind of brings to the table on both ends of the floor, you got to love it. But what Doc Rivers told us is that, as far as the Sixers go, when he was here the first time, he was playing the 4. He wasn't playing the 5. So there's just a lot of things concept-wise on defense and offense that he's not up to speed on yet, because he hasn't been with the Sixers playing the 5. Sure, the Blue Coats run some of the same stuff, but it's not identical.
Right.
And he's also not played with these players. So it's a little bit different. And so I think Doc is just worried, and I get the frustration with Mike Scott. He hasn't been good, flat out. And I've been a guy who defends Mike Scott pretty often, but he hasn't been good. And it's to a point where he's pretty much almost unplayable. So I'd almost rather just see Paul Reed get in there and make a bunch of mistakes and just see what happens. But I think that's where Doc Rivers is at right now. He kind of just trusts Mike to be in the right place right now, where he's not quite sure Paul Reed is up to speed on that. And yeah, Dwight Howard, and he said it today, he needs to stop getting ejected. They had 4 centers a couple weeks ago. Right now they have 1 essentially. So the center depth for now is a concern. Hopefully when Embiid is back, that kind of quells that.
All right. Obviously the deadline was Thursday. There was some buyout stuff. LaMarcus Aldridge. We knew Blake Griffin from ahead of time. Miami, Milwaukee, Brooklyn. I know Miami's like 8th right now, and they're way out of the mix for the top 3 spots, but they did act as if they were still in this thing, I think, over the last couple of days. So after the deadline, how do you see where the Sixers stack up, especially with Brooklyn and with what Milwaukee was able to do?
I don't think kind of the hierarchy of the East really changed very much. I don't think the Griffin or Aldridge remove, if I'm being really frank, they don't really do much for me as far as the Nets. I still think the Nets they're great because of the 3 superstars they have in their starting lineup. I don't think Aldridge or Griffin are moves that really puts them over the top or makes them really great. Actually, Nick Claxton, for those who don't know, has been giving them great minutes as a backup 5. I'm assuming those minutes are gone now if you have Aldridge and Griffin and DeAndre Jordan. And then they also traded Jared Allen, who I happen to like an awful lot, and I thought was giving them something as well. So I don't know that any of those moves are needle movers for me. I would still say the Nets are the favorite. I would put the Sixers right behind them, though, and I'd say that they are still in front of Milwaukee. I think you make a good point about the Heat. The Heat are kind of lying in the weeds right now, but they've had a lot of stuff go against them. You think the Sixers had it bad with the COVID stuff. The Heat had it way worse. They really got hit really hard. So I do think in the second half, they're going to be primed for a big jump. I think the moves they made, Bielitsa, I think he does help them a little bit. Him and Olynyk, I guess he's a slight. I don't even know if I would say that, but I mean, him and Olynyk are kind of in the same realm. Oladipo, I don't know what to expect from him. I really don't. When he was with Indiana earlier this year, I thought I saw some glimpses of the guy he once was. You didn't see that really at all in Houston. He really struggled out there. So I don't know. Maybe he gets, goes to Miami, plays with Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, and maybe he raises his level of play. But there's still a big question mark. But I do expect him to make a push. But I really don't. I don't see the East hierarchy really changing all that much through the deadline and even after the buyout market.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you. I feel like Blake Griffin, I think, tweeted something out funny. Like, all these people are bashing Brooklyn that they put this team together. He said, everybody says I stink, and now you're criticizing me for going to this team. LaMarcus Aldridge is another one. Like, I'm not sure that Aldridge, like, late in the game, if you're Brooklyn – Nick Claxton, to me, is a better defensive player than Aldridge is. So I don't know. I don't know how much Aldridge still has left in the tank. I mean, he's a 12-point-a-game scorer playing regular minutes. What's he going to do on that team? I don't know.
Yeah, it was funny to me, Mike, because I tweeted over the weekend, and I stand by it, is I feel like Drummond would have been a much better fit on the Nets, and Aldridge would have been a much better fit on the Lakers.
Yeah.
So it's just funny the way that worked out, because Andre Drummond would have just you just let Harden and Durant and Irving and Joe Harris fire away and just plant Andre Drummond underneath the basket and let him collect offensive rebounds. I mean, he would have feasted off that. And then I thought Aldridge would have been better as kind of like a pick and pop option, playing with LeBron James and Anthony Davis. To me, like is Andre Drummond like that significantly better than Marc Gasol?
Yeah.
I mean, I think he's better, but is he that much better at this point in their careers? So I just, again, to me, neither guy moves the needle. As you talked about, closing out a game, if you had to play the Sixers and you got to throw somebody on Joel Embiid, I don't think the Nets' best option might be DeAndre Jordan, and that's not that great of an option for them.
No.
And the Lakers, if it gets to that point, the Lakers, you're going to throw Andre Drummond out there over Marc Gasol. Like, I don't see that either. So I just, and I think it's a good perspective to have, though, right, Mike? Like, buyout guys, if you're Brooklyn, of course, it's worth taking a flyer on because it doesn't cost you anything. But to say that it's going to be this crazy move that, it's all rigged and now the Nets are going to walk to the finals, I don't think that's the case either. Yeah. So it's just like, it's just having the balance and perspective of that.
Yeah, and just for the people out there wondering, Miami, they added Oladipo, they got Bjelica, a guy that the Sixers had some interest in. They added Ariza, who hasn't played essentially, he didn't play at all this year. So they've added three pieces. One who hasn't played all. Bjelica's just, he's a depth guy who Miami might have to start. And then Oladipo, who's been not the same Oladipo that I think is in everybody's head that they remember from like 3 seasons ago in Indiana when he really kind of burst out, and then he's kind of faded since. So they did make an attempt to get better. Also, Fournier going to Boston, I don't know that does much for them. He's a guy who's hurt the Sixers a bit, but
can't play center, Mike.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't know. The East is going to be interesting, but I kind of agree with you. I thought this West Coast trip was going to be interesting to see if the Sixers lost ground. I know it's frustrating that they didn't separate, but they also didn't lose ground. So, Brooklyn's been putting the pressure on them. They keep winning. I thought that was pretty telling. And without Joel Embiid.
Right. That's what I was going to say. I mean, that's, to me, is the most impressive thing. Since Joel Embiid went down, they played great basketball. And the only time we've ever seen that was Simmons' rookie year when they closed out, that season on that crazy run and won like 17 games in a row. We haven't seen anything like that without Joel Embiid on the court the last couple of years. So for them to be playing that good at basketball, you've seen Danny Green really step up. Tobias Harris they lost to the Clippers and that was a rough game, but Tobias Harris was outstanding in that game. And he's been outstanding. So it's telling in that it's difficult. West Coast trip, trade deadline, no Joel Embiid, all of those factors. And the fact that they were able to go, if they come back, Mike, and 3-1 right now on the trip right now, if they win one out of the next two and they're and it's like a 4-3 road trip, whatever, 4-2, whatever it is, that's not bad. Yeah. That's actually really good. Anything above 500 under those circumstances, I think is great. I think this has told me a lot about the Sixers beyond Joel Embiid. And, I am just, the only thing I guess I'm kind of intrigued to see is they obviously play a different brand of basketball when Joel Embiid plays and when he doesn't. So they've been playing really well. I'm curious to see how it looks when Joel Embiid is in there. I'm curious to see how they adjust to him, how he adjusts to them, and how that kind of all works out. And they're, they have plenty of time to work that out. I think 26 games left. After even after tomorrow. So we'll see how that all looks. But it's very encouraging to see the way they played without Joel Embiid and kind of the quote unquote team they are forming, as opposed to last year or years before that, where maybe they had good players, but they weren't a good team. I think we're kind of entering that, not even entering, we're in that space right now where they are a good team.
All right, Paul Hudrick and the guys do a great job covering the Sixers at 97.3 ESPN.com. The stretch run is here tomorrow night. Sixers Nuggets right here on 97.3. For more on the Sixers, go to 97.3 ESPN.com. Follow him at Paul Hudrick. All right, Paul, get some rest.
Yeah, sounds good, Mike. Thanks, man.
Take care. He, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline, and those guys did a great job at the NBA trade deadline covering the Sixers and getting you all the latest information on this team.